Hi, guys. This is Shannon from Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem, and we're in week 2 of our 2-week season break. We will be back next week with brand spanking new episodes for season 3. In the meantime, we wanted to give you this composite of guest recordings and their stories from the last 2 seasons, just so that you have something to listen to while you're waiting for us to return. We look forward to talking to you again next week. Bye.
Hi, I'm Laura Hayden. I'm waving at the camera as if anyone can see me. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. My husband joined the Air Force to see the world, and we finally got to Colorado, and I wanted to stick, but we had to come back 2 more times before we finally stuck. So he's retired, and we live here permanently now. I'm a multi-published author. I've got 15 full-length novels, half dozen or so short stories published from a wide variety of publishers, Random House, Harlequin, Kensington. So I go back to the traditional publishing, and now I'm in indie publishing. I own Author, which is a online bookstore tailored more toward dealing with authors than anything else, and good customers. Well, my story is a personal one to a degree. As I said, I grew up in Alabama, and my husband did too. And he was there, and we joined the Air Force, and we assumed we'd be getting some sort of far-flung assignment, and moved us from Birmingham to Montgomery, Alabama, 90 miles due south. I didn't have to change my driver's license, my car tag. I knew the answer to War Eagle or Roll Tide. It's Roll Tide. I knew my Alabama politics, so it was a real nice introduction into the Air Force family, not to have to learn a whole new state in identification. I was working for the telephone company. I was an engineer with the telephone company. And I thought, well, okay, this was before the divestiture. So it was AT&T. I worked for South Central Bell. I said, I can find a job in Montgomery. There's telephones everywhere, except for the fact that my area of expertise was being done for Montgomery and my old office in Birmingham. So there was absolutely no jobs in Montgomery at all. So I went on leave of absence. Technically, I still am on leave of absence because I never had any paperwork otherwise. Because I thought, sure, they'd come up with a position. They never did. So I'm bored. I'm sitting around the house. So I went down to this nice little bookstore called Trading Books, about a mile or 2 away from the neighborhood. And I started looking for reading material. And I overheard the owner talking about having problems with employees. I said, well, I'm looking for some part-time work. And so he says, okay, well, what do you know about? And he started quizzing me on books and authors. And because I'm a reader, I knew all the answers. Thank God. He hired me on the spot to work 2 days a week. His name was Donald Bergquist, Bergquist. And I soon learned that Don was really a character. I had no idea how old he was. You know how it is when you're young. I was 24 and he was 44, and that was ancient. But he had an assortment of jobs. He owned this bookstore. He had 2 locations to serve you, 100,000 titles in stock. He also owned a bookstore before that had gone under, and I learned never diversify into sundries. They take up space, the markup's lousy, they don't sell, and you can't return them. So that's why my bookstore never had a lot of sundries. And one thing is he used to run the concessions at the Alabama prison system. More about that later.
Yeah.
Now, Don had this habit of hiring hard luck cases. And I can really attest to that, judging by some of the people I worked with. Of course, folks might try to say that about me, but I only started out as a part-time employee. And 6 weeks later, I was the manager of the store, and he and his wife had gone to Europe for a prolonged vacation. And when they left the store, it was $4,000 in debt, and they returned 6 weeks later, they were $4,000 in the black. And I had wired them money several times during the trip. So after that, I was the golden girl. I could do whatever I wanted because I had literally saved his business by being smart.
Nice.
He said I was the only exception he'd ever made to his hard luck hiring rule. And I'm really glad he made that exception and said that to me. Everybody else is really crazy, but you're really good. I worked there from March 1980 to about April 82. And then I worked some on and off time. I'd had a baby, and I'd bring the baby in and I'd do comic book grading. I'm a comic book grader back in the old days, until we finally moved away in the summer of 83. So let's jump to October of 84. I no longer live in Alabama, but I've been in Texas for a year and a half. And during the time, you go back home for holidays. We were visiting family in Birmingham and Tuscaloosa, but we never had any reason to go through Montgomery. So working at Trading Books was a pleasant memory, but not a connection that I maintained. I didn't go visit anybody. So I'll say that everything I'm talking about now, I gleaned from these meager recollections of mine, newspaper reports, and more importantly, court records. Lots and lots of court records.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So October 1983, Don and his wife, Hannelore, she was German. I believe they had met in Mexico, gotten married. They decided to renovate their kitchen and needed some carpentry work. Don looked in the Bulletin, which was sort of a thrifty nickel sort of tabloid, to find someone who could handle building cabinets, including a china cabinet. And he found the name and the number of a man named Joe Hooks. Joseph Bryant Hooks, Joe, was 32. He was a laborer by day and a carpenter on the weekends and after work. Later, he said that as to this particular job, he'd always worked on a handshake deal, but Don made him sign a written contract because he was paying half the money up front. He was going to pay him $2,500 for the job and paid him $1,250 in advance, and he made him sign paperwork. The contract stipulated that Hooks should begin work on October 3rd, 1984, and to complete the job within 20 days. And then he'd get the rest of the money. Well, 20 days came and went, and Joe hadn't started the job. His excuse was he was having problems obtaining construction materials. So now it's Friday, November 16th, 1984. Joe calls Don and his wife, Hannelore, around about 9:10 in the morning and asks them to meet at his house to look and approve some samples for the job. When they get there, he's not home, but there's a note saying he'll be right back, so they wait for him. What they don't know is that Hooks has blown all the money on debts and drugs. He had a lifelong addiction, according to his brother, starting when he was 13, sniffing glue. In high school, he used and dealt drugs. After high school, he joined the Army. It was the Vietnam era, but received an undesirable discharge. Now, that's different. That's sort of a mid-level one. It's an administrative discharge, which are under conditions other than honorable. It's usually given to military members who don't qualify for an honorable discharge. But with an undesirable discharge, there is no punishment, not like dishonorable.
Okay.
It's sort of that mid-level. So that morning, Hooks went to the place where he works. He worked at a place called Home Improvers. And I can't find anything about it, but I'm pretty sure it was one of those construction workers for hire type companies located in one of the older homes in downtown Montgomery. Hooks picks up his work companion, a man by the name of Paul Seary, at 7:15 a.m. and heads to a job site in Prattville. Now, Prattville is a bedroom community just north of Montgomery, about 8 miles away. But once they get there, Hooks tells Paul that he has to go to court, and he drives away. So Hooks heads to the home of Linda Norris around 8:30 a.m. He'd done some carpentry work for Linda and still had a key to her house. He also knew she wouldn't be home and that she kept a gun in her bedside table.
Great.
He unlocked the front door, found and took the loaded gun, and locked the house back up. Later, we'll learn that he took 4 hits of speed and smoked 2 joints at some point during this time, which apparently was his normal.
So he took some uppers and some downers.
Yeah, so, he was just in a whirl.
Who needs coffee and a bran muffin?
When he arrives at his own house, he sees Don and Hannelore waiting for him, and he shows them some Michael samples for approval, and they don't like the color. So he offers to take them to his, air quotes, warehouse to look at some other samples there. And they say, okay. And they all pile into Don's 1977 Chevy Caprice, which is an ugly brown station wagon that I so remember. It's because he could always put square boxes in the back of that thing. We had boxes and boxes of books at his house and in the store, and he would transform because he could fit the exact number of boxes in the back of this old square station wagon of his. So it's a 10-minute trip that ends up on a dirt road about 3 to 4 miles outside the city of Montgomery into the county of Montgomery. They make a couple of turns and end up at what looks like abandoned houses, but no warehouse. Hook pulls out Linda Norris's .38 revolver and shoots Don twice, one point blank against his head and another in the chest.
Oh.
Hooks was in the passenger seat. Don was driving. Hannelore was in back. Later, Hooks said the only thing that I thought would resolve the problem, the financial problem, I didn't know of any other way to get out of it. Money was all gone.
It's not even that much money. That's the thing that kills me about stories like this.
In 84, my mortgage was $400 a month.
Yeah.
So $1,250 was a good amount. Then he turns in his seat and he shoots Hannelore. And he said, that's the one I hated. I didn't want to shoot her. I really didn't. I didn't know any other way to get out of it. I think I shot her twice. I think it was twice. I don't remember.
Oh.
And then later on, he says, I didn't want to do it because she reminded me of my mother. But you notice he shot her in the head, the chest, and the throat. So he drags Dawn's body out of the car and does the same with Hannelore, but drags her about 25 yards away. It's like he didn't want to be close to her. He goes back to Dawn's body, takes his wallet, then drives off in that station wagon and abandons it in a parking lot of a discount store, which was about 2.5 miles away up at the main drag. There's a circle that goes around Montgomery, and this was the Southern Boulevard. So it was right. He came up from the south to the first real congested area where there'd be parking lots full of cars. He says he doesn't remember this. And in the questioning, the police said, well, you don't remember almost hitting a pedestrian in that parking lot? Apparently he caused a lot of attention. But at that point, no one did anything. He takes off on foot and heads back home. He leaves the car, abandons the car, takes off on foot and goes back home, which, as I learned, according to the police, what he's talking about is, it was so far away and I had to stop and pant and catch my breath. It was less than a mile. I actually pulled up. I found his address and I know where he abandoned the car. It's like, what are you talking about? It was, you were so up on drugs, you don't remember anything. But once he gets to his house, he wipes the blood off his hands and disposes the paper towels in a trash can near his truck. Stupid thing number one.
Mm-hmm.
He goes inside and changes his clothes and washes the bloody ones, as well as washing the gun.
What in the... Okay.
I don't think he did it in the washing machine, but he washed the gun.
He washed it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So once he gets his back into clean clothes, he tries to take the gun back to Linda's house, but her neighbors are around. So he drives around, he stops off, and I'm pretty sure it's at McDonald's because that was the only place there at the street he mentioned, and tried to eat and really couldn't do it. And he finally gets back to Linda's house and the coast is clear and he puts the gun back. He heads back to the Prattville job site. As he's driving, he hears on the radio that 2 bodies have been found. Now he's really freaked. He goes to the job and tells Paul, the guy he dropped off that morning, he told him that he had a court case and it hadn't been called yet. So I've got to go back. I just came to drive all the way here just to tell you that. Then he drives around and listens to the radio. He doesn't want to be far away from the radio because he wants to know what's going on. He finally stops the payphone and gets to Paul and says, look, I'm coming back. I'll pick you up. Don't worry about it. Because if he did come back and pick up Paul, Paul would have been stranded, called the company for a ride, and the company would have found out that Joe Hooks had not been at work all day long. So meanwhile, back at the abandoned house on the dirt road, as luck would have it, an ABC agent was prowling the area. Now, the ABC is the Alcohol Beverage Control Board, and they oversee the sale of all liquor in the state of Alabama. You want to buy booze, you got to buy it from a state-run liquor store, aka an ABC store. There are no package stores with anything other than beer.
It was like that in Virginia when I lived there. ABC
It's still like that.
And I was like, well, yeah, it probably still is, but I'm like, ABC, what the heck is that?
Yeah. Alcohol beverage control.
Yep.
The agent was there because he'd been told that juveniles have been drinking near these abandoned houses, and he was investigating the area. And when he found the man's body and checked for pulse, he realized Don was dead and radioed the ABC board, who called the cops. He drove out of the area to go wait for the cops because it would be hard to tell them how to get there. Take this dirt road, that dirt road. So he goes back out to one of the main roads and waits for the cops and then brings them back to the scene of the crime. And while there, he discovers a woman's shoe. And then he looks around and he finds Hannelore, and she's still alive.
Oh,
she's moving but not talking. So paramedics, ambulance, the whole Megillah. She's taken to the hospital, which bothers me in one aspect. In Montgomery in those days, they had 3 hospitals, 2 relatively new ones and one really old Catholic hospital. And they had the ER of the day. And they rotated which hospital ran the ER for the day. And by my calculations, they had to drive past 2 hospitals to get to the ER of the day at a very old, kind of rundown Catholic hospital in downtown. I didn't even remember the hospital, let's put it that way. And I lived there for 3 years. So because there's no car, Joe took the car and abandoned it. Don has no wallet, so they don't know who he is. But my theory is because he worked with the prison system, he'd been fingerprinted as an employee, and they check the fingerprints and they figure out who he is from the fingerprints. Now they know who he is, and they're looking for his car, and they find it around 11 o'clock at night. This was done between 10 and noon. The ABC man found the body around, I think it was 12:40. They finally find the car around 11 p.m. that night. In it, they find the woman's purse. Now they know that's Hannelore. Broken pieces of a pearl necklace. She had a pearl necklace on. Parts of it was embedded into her skin.
Oh.
Other parts of it were in the back of the car. And the most important thing, 2 letters, not written in English, sitting on the dashboard. They also found a spent projectile on the left front seat of the car. But it's these letters that really broke the case in many ways. They were written in Spanish, and Hannelore was German. So the cops turned to the DA's office because the DA had a translator-interpreter on staff who was born in Puerto Rico. And it turned out these were letters outbound. These were letters she was sending out, and they hadn't gotten to the post office yet. One was going to a friend of hers who lived in Mexico, and the other was going to one of her nieces. And both letters mentioned a problem the Burke was having with an individual who had not done work he was hired for.
Uh-huh.
The letters also mentioned a former bookstore manager who owed them money who was fired, but I promise you it wasn't me.
Okay.
I don't know who it was. It was somebody who was hired after I left the area. So the cops draw a list of 22 names and business associations and neighbors. I never got a call from the cops, but a manager of the other store who knew me did. And she called me that night because the detectives are trying to figure out who would hurt Don or Hannelore. And she asked me. I said, well, Don used to run the prison concessions. Now, I'm pretty sure it was just the one at Draper Correctional, which is a men's prison in Elmore, Alabama, just north of Montgomery. And concession sells cigarettes, soft drinks, personal items to prisoners. Don always joked about dealing with the Dixie or Alabama Mafia. I thought it was a joke. Until later, I learned it was a loosely based criminal organization started in the 60s in the Deep South with residential crimes, spread to the 70s with the movement of alcohol, drugs, and fencing stolen property. In the 70s and the late 80s, known for carrying out contract killings.
Oh.
But I don't think anyone ever heard my mafia story because if they did, it was too late. They already figured out who the guy was by the time it got fed to the cops, if she ever told them, This happened on Friday. Saturday morning, Hooks goes to Paul's house, his buddy, and says he'd lied about going to court. He had family problems and been driving around all day drinking beer. Then he told Paul that some people he'd been working for had been killed and he was a suspect. So he begs Paul and another guy to say they were working with him all day on Friday. Paul says, sure, why not? Well, the cops get to Hook's name around 11 p.m. that Sunday night on November 18th and call him and ask him to come to the station. 11 o'clock at night, they say, you need to come in. We really want to talk to everybody as soon as possible. And he was just whatever number on the list of 22 people. At that point, he was not a prime suspect. But an unmarked car happened to have been in his neighborhood and followed him to the precinct because they didn't want him to run. So they just trailed him that he might or might not have noticed the cop behind him following him all the way to the police headquarters. Okay, so not only had they translated these letters now by Sunday, they'd gone to the house and saw that the kitchen was in mid-renovation. So everything's substantiated. So Hooks says, well, I was working at Prattville with Paul on Friday. And so they show him a composite photo and say, do you recognize this person? I have a feeling that was a ruse because that drawing doesn't come up anywhere in court documents. It doesn't come up anywhere in any other interrogation. I think they're testing him to see what he would say. And he says, well, I don't recognize him. And they take his fingerprints and photographs. However, this is like 2 o'clock in the morning now that they've had this informal talk with him. No rights read. This isn't an interrogation. This is just information. But while he's at the police station, the cops receive a phone call from a woman who tells them that Hooks worked with her ex-husband, this was the other guy, and with Paul, and Hooks had asked both of them to be his alibi for the morning in question. So the two guys agree to go to the police station, and Paul had heard about Don and Hannelore, and he was suspicious of Hooks. He tells them everything.
Good.
Yeah. The cops read Hooks' Miranda rights, tell Paul sold him out, and exactly what he said, and Hooks folds. But then that's when the dominoes all line up and just start toppling over. His soon-to-be ex-wife allows the police to search the house, where they find the blood-soaked paper towels and a belt with blood on it. He cleaned all his clothes and taken off his belt, but the belt still had blood on it. He confesses that he stashed Don's wallet in a McDonald's bag and put it in the trash at the address, which happens to be where he worked, Home Improvers.
Good God.
And I don't know, I should add this. A friend of ours who's just been in Montgomery for school lived in the apartments directly behind that house. I was looking at that going, oh, that's where she lived. On Sunday, they find that wallet exactly where he was said it would be. Oh, and 8 days after she's shot, Hannelore passes away.
Oh.
So now it's 2 counts of premeditated murder. According to the autopsy, Don died from a severed spinal column. That spent projectile found in the driver's seat was the second shot, a through and through, right chest to left back. Hannelore died from a headshot. They recovered the weapon from Linda Norris's house. In fact, the police went to talk to her at 2 o'clock in the morning. Apparently, they like this AM talking to witnesses and such. And she's got the gun at the door. Then she realizes it's cops. She goes, puts the gun up. But when she talks to them and finds out what they wanted for it, she gives them the gun, and it has 5 spent shells in it. 2 for Don, 3 for Hannelore. They also take a hair sample from the car, which is consistent in characteristics with Hook's hair. The blood on the belt, the paper towels, the car are all type O. And of course, this is before DNA and blood testing was at the height that it is now. But a firearms and tool mark examiner at the Department of Forensic Scientists testifies the bullet recovered from Don's head, the bullet from the seat behind Hannelore, and the expended cartridge case were all fired from the same .38 revolver, and it was fired from Linda's. And then there is the video and audio tape confession made by Hooks early Sunday morning when he folded. This went to trial in 1985. He pled not guilty and not guilty due to insanity. He was found guilty on both counts of premeditated murder, and the jury voted 7-5 for life with no parole. But the judge overturned it and gave him the death penalty.
Oh.
So Joseph Bryant Hooks sat on death row in Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama, despite several appeals. One of his appeals actually was based on a claim of suffering from frontal lobe dysfunction, which is the defense usually reserved for juvenile cases. He was 32 at the time of the crime, but he had pretty much drugged his brain so badly from the point he was a teenager. It did not develop, but they said was no excuse for what he did.
As long as you know right from wrong, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And Joseph Hooks died of complications from cancer in August 2016, 32 years after murdering 2 people and being on death row that entire time.
Jeez.
Wow.
That's the story of my friend Don, my boss.
Okay, so I'm David R. Slayton. I live in Denver, Colorado, originally from Guthrie, Oklahoma, home of many rural myths and urban myths, though really rural. I'm the author of the Adam Binder novels. Book 1, White Trash Warlock, was released in October 2020 from Blackstone Publishing in paper, ebook, and audio. It's the story of a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, who has to go to Denver, Colorado in order to save his family from whom he's been estranged and also get the chance to say, I told you so. Book 2, Trailer Park Trickster, which goes back to Guthrie and deals with more urban rural myths there, as well as some Adam's darker extended family history, which I drew on from my dark extended family history, comes out in October 2021. Yeah, so on a somewhat lighter note, perhaps, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite ghost stories that I grew up with and that I kind of had a little bit of a part in Guthrie growing up in Oklahoma in the 70s. So if you've seen Supernatural's first season, or I think a lot of other media has used it, there's a common urban/rural myth called a lady in white.
Mhm.
There was one at White Rock Lake in Texas when I lived near Dallas briefly. And I grew up with a lady in white in Guthrie at Liberty Lake, where I grew up. And I grew up half a mile walk from Liberty Lake in a trailer in the woods. And that was my upbringing. It was a weird place. Fireflies at night. And we had prowlers that would wander and look in the trailer windows. And I was like, did I dream that as a kid? Or did I see that? Very just strange goings on out there.
That's scary.
Yeah, bit of a side story, but I was kind of an insomniac as a kid. I ran weird hours. So my siblings would be sleeping and my parents would be sleeping. And I would get up and I'd wander the trailer at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. One night I distinctly remember looking out the window and seeing a man's face, a very pale white face glaring in. And I tried to scream and I couldn't. I froze with fear. And we all have had that dream as a child, I think, where you're or sometimes as adults, where you need to scream and you can't. But I completely panicked and could not make a sound. And I was a very quiet child anyway. I didn't really speak until I was 5 or 6. You had to kind of make me talk. Now I never shut up. So it's a funny contrast. But I saw this man and I tried to scream and I was so scared I wet myself, but I could not scream. And then I was telling my parents about it in the morning and they were mad because I'd wet the bed. But they did find footprints outside the next morning in the mud.
No.
Yeah. So I grew up with a lot of that kind of rural, we were in a trailer in the woods out away from things. Would not have been hard for somebody to wander up like that. But ever since I was little, and we would walk down to the lake to fish, and we had to watch out for the water moccasins, because they would try to come up to the shore. And we'd have to watch out for rattlesnakes, but at least rattlesnakes give you a warning. And we were constantly told about the lady in white. And we'd hear about her all the time. And on the weekends, you could see teenagers across the lake, and they would drive down to the lake on the other side where there were roads and places, and you'd see their pickup trucks bobbing along the roads with the headlights. And they would, drink some beer, try to see if they could find her. It was pretty common. And when we would bus to town for school, which is about a little less than an hour away. So we'd bus into school and people would be like, oh, you live on Lake Liberty. Have you seen the lady in white? And I would have nightmares about her. And she was always this very gauzy white figure, very hippie. And she would drag me under the water and drown me.
Oh.
And I would wet the bed, which again caused a lot of David's wetting the bed. What's up with David Ray? It did not help that my father tried to teach me to swim by drowning me.
Right.
A few times. He's like, just hold on to my arm. And that's all he said. And I did. He didn't say, hold your breath. He didn't give me any prep. It just dunked me to the bottom of the lake. So I saw colors.
That's how rural kids learn how to swim. You kind of get tossed in and...
I got drowned a few times by dad in such a manner before mom's like, please stop trying to teach David Ray to swim. You're going to literally. It's like, or, at least give him better instructions first. Grab my arm. Glug, glug, glug. So lady in white, terrified of drowning, wandering the trailer at night. And I would imagine her out the window. Now, again, was it a child's dream? Was it a nightmare? Was she out there? And I had nightmares about this well into adulthood. And finally, a few years ago before he passed away, I came home to visit my grandfather. He's in his rocking chair. He's living in Oklahoma City by then. And we're just spending an afternoon together. And he says, I remember your Aunt Karen, my Uncle Johnny's first wife, who also had a small trailer on our acreage. And your uncle would go out trucking and she'd get lonely. And she'd smoke her marijuana and she'd put on her wedding dress and wander the woods. She'd just scare the daylights out of those teenagers. My Aunt Karen was the lady in white.
That had been giving you nightmares.
All my life, because she and my uncle, because it was the 60s and 70s, she had gotten married in a very hippy-dippy wedding dress. A lot of Stevie Nicks in her world, a lot of pot. And she'd get high and wander the woods at night in her dress.
Scare the living daylights out of half of the community.
So this whole adulthood of like having nightmares about this woman drowning me, and it was my Aunt Karen the entire time.
So I'm Kim Olgren. I am the author of Flip, a Jillian McElroy mystery. It is a cozy mystery about a gal who flips houses, and she's pretty spunky and snarky, if you ask me. But that's her. But it's a cozy mystery, and it's a fun, fast read. So I really enjoyed writing that. But I also have an interest in horror and the paranormal and whatnot. And that's why I'm here today. So I'm first going to make a disclaimer because I do not presume to know anything medical or psychological about people who maybe have seen shadow people for those reasons. So if you feel you're overwhelmed by something like this, go seek some professional help.
All right.
Sound advice.
Yes. So shadow people are often, and I say that because shadow people are often said to be hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, which are hallucinations you have before you fall asleep or right before you wake up, where you see, sense, or feel or hear something in the room with you.
Yeah, I get those all the time, actually. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So sleep paralysis falls under this as well, because one of the legends, like the hag sits on your chest and, keeps you from being able to do anything, paralyzes you. So there's different types. There's the Hat Man, Slender Man often falls under this, and the Boogeyman, of course, even Jinn, which stem from the Middle Eastern religions, which is genie, Middle Eastern beliefs, which is a genie. But any number of dark beings, or plain old just people that look like shadows, They can be tall, small, have red eyes. There's a bunch of different descriptions, but they all pretty much have in common that it's a shadow. It moves really fast. It can dart from location to location. A lot of times they have red eyes, and there's a heavy, overbearing kind of presence that comes with them. They say they're attracted to electromagnetic energy, like cell phones and televisions and things like that. For me personally, back in 1995-ish, I had my sister and my brother-in-law over, and we were all just kind of sitting around. Me and my husband and them were sitting around just kind of chatting, hanging out, at our house. Had a little 3-bedroom rancher, typical rancher with 2 bedrooms at the end of the house and a third one in the front, toward the front of the house in the middle, and across from that was a bathroom. So my sister gets up, heads to the bathroom, comes back pretty spooked, and turns out that she saw something out of the corner of her eye in my bedroom, the master bedroom. And so she kind of poked her head in there to take a peek, and there was a shadow man in there with a hat.
Oh,
you're out.
It was properly dressed.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's just the outline. It's a shadow person with a hat. So that kind of freaked her out. My sister's a very practical person. So that was kind of weird for her. So that was kind of me. I'd already had encounters with this when I was a kid. So it was and I grew up in a family that it was like, Mom, there's a monster in my room. Go back to bed and shut up. Tough it out or shut up and go back to bed. So, so I just kind of kept it to myself, and I talked to my husband about this, and I was like, why do people always put their head under the covers? Because I kept seeing time after time when I started looking into it, because I was like, why am I seeing this? This is stupid. Time after time, people throw the covers over their head to hide from the thing.
Yeah.
Who does that? I'm like, I don't want to lose track of this thing. If it's going to attack me, I want to see it coming so I can try to do something. I don't know what, throw the covers at it. I don't know, but, I don't want to lose sight of it.
I'm with you. I want to know where it is and when it's coming at me.
Yeah. I want to know what it's doing there, So, and I think that, maybe sometimes they're attached to negative, energy, people who are unbalanced, or there's unbalanced energy in the house kind of thing. But that's just my personal opinion.
Like poltergeist. Like
What's that?
poltergeists.
Yeah, like poltergeist, exactly.
And it's often teenage or preteen female energy,
Exactly.
which is apparently quite negative.
I was just going to say, so then in my teenage years, there was one that used to hang out. There was a street light directly across the street from our house, and I had second floor bedroom window at that point. And there was one that would hang out just outside the circle of light from the street light and stare up at my bedroom window.
Oh.
And I would be, it would literally wake me up out of a dead sleep. I would go to my window and there he'd be, which is, kind of unnerving.
Kind of. Yeah.
Kind of. You had a peeping Tom.
Yes,
Right?
it's kind of like that. Yeah. So that was pretty freaky. And that went on for a couple of months until I finally got over that one. But you mentioned the young female energy. So my daughter, as a teenager, started seeing the same sorts of things. So we moved into another house by the time my kids have, gotten a little older and need their own rooms. And so we're now in the house that I live in now. And so my kids and their friends would report stuff in the house all the time, seeing shadow people, things out of the corner of their eye. I'm sure you'd probably had that experience. Almost everybody has, where something darts through the corner of your eye and you're like, what was that? But
Yeah,
and sometimes they're even white. Sometimes they're not even shadows. Sometimes they look like white shadows, if you can imagine that. Sometimes, they're associated with orbs,
yeah.
which several people have mentioned seeing in my backyard in my present house from inside the house through the window. And I'm like, well, it was this light. It was a reflection. It was this. We live in an aircraft path.
Right.
No, that's not what it was. Okay. So, but I think that even though it's something that's spooky and scary, and it really is, it's unnerving. If it's ever happened to you, where you've actually had like that shadow being looking you in the face, it's really disconcerting.
Yeah.
And you don't know if it's real or if it's not. You just kind of have to deal with it and figure it out. So, and of course, I kind of grew out of it. So I don't have that problem anymore. Where my daughter's, as I mentioned, is kind of a little bit of a hot mess. She still has those experiences because she still has that kind of frame of mind. But I mean, I walked in on my son talking to somebody in his sleep, and I woke up and he said, "Oh, you made it disappear." Like, what? I made what disappear? So yeah, it's really interesting the stories that they come out with on this. And there was I don't know if you're familiar with Coast to Coast Radio.
Yeah.
So I can't remember his name. But the guy who was running Coast to Coast Radio back in the 80s and 90s, Art Bell was his name. And he had a purported Native American shaman on there who told him all about the shadow people and where they come from and who they are, and all the different kinds of shadow people. And that's where that really got traction. So somewhere in the early 90s, Art Bell did this on Coast to Coast Radio, this, I don't know, probably hour-long session with this guy. And then the next thing you know, everybody's calling and sending him drawings and, oh my gosh, I feel validated. Somebody saw what I saw, kind of thing. So then that took off. And then there was a lady who wrote a book about it called Heidi Hollis, who actually wrote a couple of books about the shadow people. Who said, oh, no, they're aliens. They're bad. They're evil. Oh, my God, they're going to come kill us all and take over our planet.
Jeez.
So, yeah.
Mine aren't aliens, so there.
So there are a number of conspiracy theories out there about these things. And nobody really can say exactly what they are. But I think human beings being what we are and having the imaginations that we have, it doesn't surprise me that things like that can happen.
No, and the fun thing about it is it's one of those things that's universal too. Like you talk to somebody in another country and they'll report the same sort of thing.
Yes, there are stories about shadow people from all over the world, going back thousands of years.
H.P. Lovecraft had them where he would wake up with a figure over him. He called them night gaunts.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so when I found that out, that was kind of fun because he'd written a whole thing about them. So then I did a twist off of it in a different story. But what's fascinating is when I was doing some research for something, people were drawing them and putting them online. And a lot of them, it's very similar.
Yeah.
The same thing is happening. Now, mine's different. So when I get them, there was a person with a face standing over me, and then they'd lunge for me. My poor husband, I would backpedal across the bed and like shriek, slam into him. And so at some point he would just wrap his arms around and pull me in, and then he'd just pass right back out because he's a really good sleeper.
Yeah, my husband woke up one time and he said he witnessed me like just sit bolt upright in bed from a prone position. He's like, it was not a natural way to just come sitting up in bed. He said, I just sat bolt upright like something had a string and pulled me up out of bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of the times that I was experiencing that, kind of freaked him out too.
I'm Patrick Hester. I'm an author. I am a 2-time Hugo Award winner for podcasting and editing on a fanzine, which was a website, sfsignal.com. It's also where I got my Hugo for podcasting. I mostly write science fiction and fantasy. I have a book that was published a few years back called Samantha Kane Into the Fire. It's an urban fantasy set in Denver. I've also gotten a few short stories out there and a couple of anthologies, but it's been a while since I've done anything like that. I produced and hosted the SF Signal podcast from September 2010 through May of 2016. That's the one I won a Hugo for. And I've been doing the Functional Nerds podcast for almost 11 years. We recently passed 500 episodes, and I'm on my second host. So the first host had to leave for family reasons. He and his wife had a second child, and he had some health issues, John Emilio, so he ended up leaving. And I brought Tracy Townsend on board, who is an academic. She's a teacher. She is a writer in her own right. She's got a couple of books out there. And like I said, we just passed 500 episodes. And before that, I produced I Should Be Writing for Merle Lafferty for several years. So I've been doing podcasting for about 11 years now. Well, I guess the theme was houses. Is that where you went?
I did. Yes, that's where I went.
Okay. So
Houses. Dead house.
So basically what I went with is the Winchester Mystery House, or as I remember it, the Winchester Madhouse. And I don't know why I remember it that way, but I do. My sources, since I had to have sources, are my brain, Wikipedia, Google Foo, Atlas Obscura, Patch.com, and the truth about SarahWinchester.com.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah. So lots of stuff going on there. You guys know this, but maybe your listeners don't. I grew up in Fresno, California, and a couple times every year, my grandmother and I would get on a Greyhound bus, and we would head to San Jose to stay for a week or two with my eldest aunt and her family. And on the road, I would always see the billboards, right? Winchester Mystery House, come to the Winchester Mystery House. And I swear they said Madhouse, but apparently I'm wrong. I don't know. Anyway, I would see those billboards, and I always wanted to go. And my aunt and uncle would ask us when we got there, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to do this? And I would always say, I want to go to the Winchester Mystery House. And I don't know if it was too expensive or if it was just creepy and they didn't want to go, but we never, ever went. Never got to go to the Winchester Mystery House. So that just means that it's kind of been kept alive in my memory as this super creepy, kooky thing that I've always wanted to know more about. And this gave me the opportunity to read about it. William Wirt Winchester, Wirt, W-I-R-T, which is a weird spelling, married Sarah Pardee Lockwood on September 30th, 1862. They had one daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, who was born on June 15th, 1866, and died just a month later on July 25th, 1866, of marasmus, which is a form of severe malnutrition characterized by energy deficiency, because the body is unable to metabolize proteins.
Oh.
It can occur in anyone with severe malnutrition, but it usually occurs in young children and babies, which is really sad. William Winchester was the only son and heir of Oliver Winchester, owner of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, creators of the repeating rifle family of weapons, most famously the Model 1873, which became known as the gun that won the West, or the gun that killed like lots and lots of people. Oliver Winchester died in December 1880, and his son William inherited the company. But he was sick. He was already sick, and he ended up dying of tuberculosis just 4 months after his dad. And Sarah, his widow, inherited, and this is going to blow your mind a little bit, she inherited $20 million.
Wow.
Which is the equivalent to $536 million today.
Wow.
And 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. That provided her with roughly $1,000 a day.
And she just lost her daughter and her husband.
Yes. And in today's money, that's 27 grand a day.
Wow.
So I'm not shitting here. She was Scrooge McDuck rich. If she wanted to, she could have totally afforded a giant vault filled with gold coins to swim in.
I was going to say, she was doing some DuckTales shit. Like, they never mentioned that gold room in the Winchester mansion, but
she totally could have had it if she wanted it. This being the late 19th century, mysticism was all the rage. Mm-hmm. People were holding seances. They were practicing magic. They were participating in all sorts of rituals. You had famous folks like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife and Harry Houdini, who were openly investigating the paranormal and joining secret societies. It was really the in thing to do if you were anybody. So it's no surprise that Sarah Winchester, being who she was and where she was in society, would attend a seance in hopes of speaking with her dead husband. As the legend goes, a medium in Boston was able to channel William, who told Sarah that she needed to go west and build a home for herself and for the spirits of the people who died at the end of a Winchester rifle. Now, other reports of that seance say that Sarah already believed her family to be haunted and her fortune to be cursed by the ghosts. And that in when the medium channeled William, he actually warned her that not only did she need to do that, but it was the only way that she would survive and continue living was if she went and built a home to hide herself from the ghosts. So 2 different versions of that story there, depending on where you go. The timeline is also a little bit different. Wikipedia actually has different pages with different dates on it for the same things. So that's always fun. But we know that in 1885, after a few years abroad in Europe, Sarah moved to California. And in 1886, she purchased either 140 or 161 acres of land, depending on the source. That was called Lanada Villa, the majority of which is now downtown Los Altos, California. She also purchased, as part of that, an unfinished farmhouse that would eventually become the Winchester Mansion. Sarah hired carpenters, but no architect. She did all the designs herself, but she never committed them to paper. So you were talking about there was architectural designs of the homes built. There are none surviving of the Winchester house.
Wow.
She did all the designs herself, and then construction began. It continued, again, depending on who you talk to, nearly nonstop until her death on September 5th, 1922, at 10:45 p.m. from heart failure. She was 83 years old. And legend has it that she died. Someone went and told the workers, and they basically just dropped their tools right where they were standing and walked away. They left nails half hammered in, bits of construction unfinished, you name it, they just left it and they walked away. Some say the construction never stopped in the 38 years, but there are conflicting reports, including one that quotes Sarah as saying that she had stopped it occasionally for her own peace of mind because it was driving her nuts.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about that. Could you imagine perpetually living in construction with all that noise?
And so it all depends on what you read from where. She actually owned other properties as well that she would stay out from time to time. She had a boat that was called the Ark of Sarah. And she would go out and stay on the boat sometimes. And so she didn't continuously live in the house. The home itself contains numerous oddities, such as doors and stairways that go nowhere, windows overlooking other rooms, and stairs with odd-sized risers or steps. Some say these features were designed by Sarah to confuse the ghosts who haunted the place, that she built it as a maze of confusing twists and turns to gain peace from the ghosts who were haunting her. Some say they were tormenting her. Reportedly, she slept in a different room every night, and only one of the toilets in the house actually worked because all the others were decoys intended to confuse the ghosts.
But the ghosts don't need to use the bathroom.
I don't know. This is the logic that she had in there. The odd size risers or the height of the steps, they figured out was actually due to Sarah's debilitating arthritis. She could only lift her feet a few inches off the ground. And so a normal step was too high for her. So she actually designed the steps to be much, much shallower, not as high, so that she could go anywhere in the house unhindered and without anybody helping her. And she would wander the house all the time. She did have a dedicated bedroom, but she got trapped in it at one point during the earthquake. And so that's when she started moving rooms. She didn't like to stay in that room anymore. She had a room dedicated to seances in the mansion, and often would hold a seance and commune with the ghosts who haunted the place. One legend says that the ghosts themselves would come to her during the seances and tell her how to build out the house, and that she would take that feedback back to the contractors and say, now you need to do this, or now you need to do that. That included a room that had no floor, no ceiling, and was tucked between her bedroom and the seance room itself. So just basically, huge open space. More odd designs included the building of trapdoors, secret passages, a skylight in the floor, spiderweb windows, and staircases, again, that led to nowhere. There are also doors that opened to blank walls, a dangerous door on the second floor that opens out into the yard below. There are tiny doors that lead to large spaces, and large doors that lead to very small spaces. Some of them you can't even go through. You just see the room beyond. Now, there is an alternate theory on the Winchester House's design, and that's that Sarah was creating a puzzle full of encryptions inspired by the work of English philosopher Francis Bacon. This theory suggests that Sarah, being who she was and being a part of society and at a specific tier of society, was a member of some sort of mystic society like the Rosicrucians or the Freemasons or the co-Freemasons, which was actually all the rage in Europe at the time that she was traveling in Europe. And the co-Freemasons would actually admit women. The Freemasons were known not to.
Right.
Except there were occasions when someone of a certain stature got in. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that she was a Freemason, that she got in. And that she used mathematics and symbols throughout the house that you would normally see in Freemasonry. There are symbols hidden in the ballroom that people have identified. There's the Shakespeare windows that use quotes from Shakespeare. There's the iron gates. And all of these things combined create some sort of puzzle that you're supposed to solve. What happens when you solve it, I don't know. Part of this theory is that she was obsessed with the number 13, and that can be seen everywhere throughout the Winchester house. 13 is normally an unlucky number, but it's also a prime number. She has 13 paned windows and 13 step stairways, including one where the 13th step is actually behind the door. And supposedly the door can only be opened like through divine intervention or prayer. Some closets have 13 hooks in them. There is 13 blue and amber stones in a special window that she designed. There's 13 ceiling panels in the entranceway, 13 windows in the 13th bathroom. The spiderweb patterns often have 13 in the windows.
He had a bathroom big enough for 13 windows.
Yes.
And I'm just angry.
Even her will had 13 parts to it, and she signed it 13 times.
So nobody at any point suggested that maybe Sarah was just tripping balls when she.
Yes, that's actually the third theory, is that she was just crazy.
Okay.
Now, Sarah was a child prodigy, which just, leads credence to this theory of symbology and puzzles. By the age of 12, she was already fluent in Latin, French, Spanish, and Italian. She had an intimate knowledge of the classics, most notably Homer and Shakespeare, and along with a remarkable talent as a musician. So she was a child prodigy. She was very intelligent. She was raised and educated in an environment ripe with Freemasonic and Rosicrucian philosophy. Several of Sarah's uncles and cousins were Freemasons, again, leading people to believe that maybe she had gotten in and became a Freemason. At an early age, she was admitted to Yale's only female scholastic institution, known as the Young Ladies Collegiate Institute. Two of the school's most influential administrators and professors, Judson A. Root and his brother, N.W. Taylor Root, were both Rose Crux Freemasons, I think is how it's pronounced. In addition to the liberal arts, the Roots also set forth a strict curriculum consisting of the sciences and mathematics. So this just all leads into the Freemasonry kind of aspect of this. Like 13, the prime numbers 7 and 11 are also seated throughout the house. These numbers consistently show up in the number of windows in many of the rooms, or the number of stairs in the staircases, or the rails and the railings, or the number of panels in the floors and walls, or lights in the chandelier, etc. So all these prime numbers, 7, 11, and 13, were extremely important to Sarah. And they also appeared in a lot of the stuff that Francis Bacon did. Numbers, symbols, labyrinths were all part of secret societies and Freemasonry at the time, lending so many people to believe that this was one of the bases for Sarah's designs, that her upbringing, education, and travel as an adult all led her down that path. Now, you can go down that path, or you can go down the supernatural path. When you look at the house itself, the original 8-room farmhouse grew into the world's most unusual and sprawling mansion. It included 7 stories prior to the 1908 earthquake. When that hit, you lost 3 stories. It's been 4 stories ever since. Roughly 161 rooms, including 40 bedrooms. The reason I say roughly is because, again, no formal plans exist. So no one knows exactly how many rooms existed prior to the earthquake, or how many secret rooms might still be hidden behind a wall or a door somewhere. There's 2 ballrooms, one completed and one unfinished, 47 fireplaces, over 10,000 panes of glass, 17 chimneys with evidence of 2 others, chimney, 2 basement levels and 3 elevators. It's 24,000 square feet. It has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 52 skylights, 47 stairways, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens. So it's crazy. To this day, the Winchester Mystery House is considered one of the most haunted places in the world. The 3rd floor is reported to be the hot spot for the majority of haunted activity. Ghosts have been seen throughout the house's long history. One of the most famous ones is the wheelbarrow ghost. He has been seen pushing a wheelbarrow, and sometimes people say it's full of coal, others it's full of ash, but they have seen him pushing it through the grand ballroom and the basement, all over the place. Visitors who go there for tours, because you can take tours, have reported someone tugging on their shirt to get their attention. Women have said that someone's tugging on their skirt, and when they turn, there's no one there. Tour guides report bring people into a room, and they'll start talking, and then they'll hear other people in the hallway. They'll go out to get them and bring them in because everybody's supposed to stay together, and there's nobody there. Or they'll go out and they'll see a shadow go around the corner. And they'll go after the shadow to a long hallway, and the hallway's empty and there's no one there. Footsteps can often be heard on the 3rd floor when there's nothing going on up there. There's no tours. That's where the servants all stayed. And a lot of people think that when the servants died, they just hung around. They never left. When you're on the 3rd floor, that's where people say it's the creepiest, spookiest vibe in the world. It just feels weird. It feels closed in. It's very, very quiet. And the quiet is so intense that you can't actually hear anything else going on in the house, even when there's other tours going on. What's funny is the other tours can hear you, but you can't hear them, is what people report. When you're on that third floor, it's just intensely quiet and uncomfortable. This will make Shannon smile. Shadow figures and shapes can often be seen throughout the whole house. They'll be turning corners or moving down hallways, appearing in windows, and occasionally in the gardens surrounding the property. In 2017, they had set up security cameras to protect the place. And an exterior security camera around the witching hour caught a mysterious floating light on one of the mansion's balconies in the middle of the night. And the doors are supposedly alarmed. So if someone had gone out the door, it would have set off an alarm. That never happened. There's just this light floating across the balcony and then floats back and disappears. You can see that online. There are lots of reports of people taking photographs while visiting the mansion. And when they actually look at them, they see odd shadows and shapes in spots. Some report shadow figures, some report orbs and other lights where there should be none. There's even on the main website for the Winchester Mystery House, their marketing person was taking shots to use for the website. And when he starts going through them, he finds one where it looks like someone's standing in one of the supposedly empty windows when there's no one in there. You might like this. It was the inspiration for Walt Disney's Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
It has been featured in several novels, plays, TV shows. Paranormal investigations have been done there. A feaure film starring Helen Mirren as Sarah Winchester happened a couple years back.
That was
bad.
a very bad movie. I saw that in the theater. I felt bad for Helen Mirren after seeing that movie.
An episode of Mythbusters happened there. They went and explored the place. The Lore podcast has been there, and the 100th episode of American Horror Story featured the Winchester Mystery House. So lots of stuff going on there. Whether she built it to contain and soothe the souls of people who were killed by the Winchester rifles, or to satisfy and prove some mathematical or symbolical theories, is still a mystery. We don't know. But we do know that the Winchester Mystery House remains a focal point for a lot of people to this day. It's like a destination, a haunted destination for them and for anybody interested in the paranormal.
If you're thinking of starting a podcast or even just starting to research it, Buzzsprout is your go-to source for information and hosting. They have tons of videos and write-ups on everything you need to know about recording and distributing a podcast, and they even provide easy ways to get analytics on how your podcast is doing. We use Buzzsprout for our podcast hosting, and through them we've been able to connect with tons of resources and distributors. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you, gets you a $20 Amazon gift card if you sign up for a paid plan, and help support our show. A win-win. Not only do they help you get started, but they also do small things to encourage you, such as awarding you badges as you hit various milestones. Join over 100,000 podcasters already using Buzzsprout to get their message out to the world.